Now on BBC Northern Ireland, we celebrate a unique figure in the history of broadcasting. Sir Huw Wheldon, who died last month, is remembered in this omnibus tribute for his pioneering work in music and arts programmes. The story of Huw Wheldon and the Monitor years, as told by his friends.
Good evening. The return of Monitor. And our first guest in this first programme in our new series is Orson Welles. At the moment...
This first omnibus in a new series pays tribute to one of its own founding fathers. Huw Wheldon started the first regular arts programme on television in 1958. He was its editor and presenter, and during 6.5 years of Monitor, he fostered and encouraged young talent like Ken Russell, John Schlesinger, Humphrey Burton, John Berger, Melvyn Bragg. In his later years, he became controller and then managing director of BBC Television. He was knighted in 1976. Tonight, we look back at the pioneering years of Monitor, and with the memories and comments of his friends and colleagues, we celebrate the life and the programmes of Huw Wheldon. In Monitor, Wheldon and his producers brought the best in arts documentary and performance to the television screen. John Barbarolli here rehearsing with the Halle Orchestra. The poet John Betjeman in 1959, making the first of his concerned wanderings around the architectural landscape of London. The sculptor Henry Moore talked to Wheldon at his home in Hertfordshire. Ezra Pound appeared. Monitor cameras filmed him in his lair in the Dolomites. And in his at King's College, Cambridge, E.M. Forster. The list goes on. The Monitor archives are a roll call of the great and famous in contemporary arts and in the world of entertainment.
Hello, ground control calling. What is your exact position? I'm laying on my back with my knees drawn up.
To the Monitor studio came a 23-year-old dancer who'd hit the headlines when he defected from the Kirov Ballet, Rudolf Nureyev. And for the first, but certainly not the last time, the great and famous began to stalk their native landscapes for the benefit of the cameras. Benjamin Britten, on the seashore at Aldborough. Robert Graves posed with his family at his home in Mallorca, and the distinguished man of letters even submitted to being filmed in his bathroom in order to illustrate one of his poems. Behind all this, the work of many young directors and producers, was the presiding figure of Huw Wheldon.
I think of him really as an African game hunter. He really, and I think he saw himself as that. And I think probably that what had happened was he opened up the continent, shot most of the big game, so that when people like myself and David Jones and Humphrey Burton came in afterwards, we were really confined to sort of shooting the mosquitoes, because most of the big numbers, like Henry Moore and so forth, had been shot out of the trees by Huw in his safari jacket and his double-barreled elephant gun.
Sometimes the quarry shot back, Orson Welles.
All right, let me come at the same thing from another direction. I don't know how many readings or interpretations, or whatever the phrase is, there are of this book, but there are certainly a great many, formal ones. People have written, Edwin Moore and people have written books, haven't they?
Any amount of gobbledygook has been written.
Well, it's not all gobbledygook, because you can take meanings out of the book. That's why it's a good book.
A good film ought to be as capable of many interpretations as a good book.
Yeah.
And I think it is for the creative artist to hold his tongue on this question. So if you'll forgive me, I refuse to reply to you.
Lastly, Madame Rambert, let's turn for a moment to dancers. Wasn't Nijinsky, was he an interesting man to work with?
Oh, he was wonderful, but you know you will have to do 20 monitors to say something about Nijinsky.
Give me something in two sentences.
Oh, you do ask a lot, you know. Well, if I say that he was a genius, both as a dancer and as a choreographer, will that satisfy you?
No, not really.
No? If I tell you that when people ask me, did he really remain suspended in the air when he jumped, and I will say, perhaps he didn't, but he looked as though he had, and that's quite enough for somebody in the theater.
That begins to satisfy me a little.
That begins, that's all right.
Under Wheldon, Monitor pioneered new forms of television. Here, the dramatized biography takes its first step, one of the earliest and still the most celebrated, the story of Elgar from 1962. The producer was Humphrey Burton, the director a young photographer who'd made a few amateur films before Wheldon gave him a job, Ken Russell.
He was the British Film School, and I wanted a teacher. And he taught film, though he knew nothing about film, in a way that I don't think anyone else in the world could do it, except maybe Eisenstein or Orson Welles. And they knew a lot about film. But I think he got a lot out of his students, because that's what we were, knowing nothing about it. But he made us sort of analyze film. He made us look at the structure, the architecture of how to tell a story. And so that was his talent. He could get things out of you didn't know you had.
In 1962, Melvyn Bragg joined Wheldon's team as a production trainee.
Well, I think Hugh's method of recruiting was always to go slightly off-centre. I think it was to do with quirkiness, to do with unexpectedness, to do with, let's see if this chap will work because it isn't on the tram lines. Because I think he felt he wasn't on the tram line. There was not much in his past which said this man will spend the major part of his professional lifetime in the arts, and very little in his past had said he would spend it in an imaginative medium, and a new imaginative medium television, and very little had said he would be inventive in imaginative medium. His life hadn't worked that way, and yet there it was, and it was working very well. And I think he quite liked people who similarly made a shift, because it gave them an energy, perhaps, or not. That might be it.
He'd come into television himself comparatively late in life, at the age of 36, and as a publicity officer. He couldn't get a job as a producer. He'd had, by his own account, a singularly undistinguished school career in his native Wales.
Geography, I nearly became good at geography because I was very taken by J.R. Griffiths. We had a master called J.R. Griffiths. Mochin Tech, they used to call him, horrible name. I don't know why they called him that. Very, very nice little man, but he was sardonic. And I remember sitting in that classroom, that 4B, over there on one occasion. We used to have tests every week. And I remember having one of these little tests, 10 questions you were put, and J.R. Griffiths used to give the results in the next lesson. And he came one day to the next lesson, and of the 4 boys sitting in the back, he said, Eric Thomas, 3 out of 10. J.R. Williams, 3 out of 10. Both disappointingly average. Arthur Wynne Jones, 1 out of 10. H. Wheldon, 1 out of 10. A great improvement.
But he did get to the London School of Economics. A year after he graduated, the war began. Huw Wheldon joined the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. He reached the rank of Major, and he was decorated for bravery. In a BBC programme about D-Day, he described his experience of the Normandy landings.
I don't really remember my feelings on that day. It was a long time ago. There was no doubt the feeling of relief that you always have when you get down on dry ground and have the smell of grass and the feel of solid earth under your feet. I think I remember a feeling of elation. We had come over in waves during the day. Some of our people had started very early in the small hours before the seaborne troops came in. And the rest of us came over the day in these waves, and accordingly, by the time we came, we were able to see the ships standing off the coast. We were able to see the great capital ships blazing and blasting into inland targets. We were able to see people on the beaches, and there were aircraft all over the place, a great comfort they were too. 14,000 sorties were flown during that 24 hours. What I am absolutely certain I remember, and I'm in no doubt about, was that there was a very, very definite sense of everything going according to plan.
By 1948, Huw Wheldon had joined the Arts Council as director for Wales. He found himself part of an enthusiastic but relatively inexperienced team entrusted with the huge task of organising the Festival of Britain. A later president of the Royal Academy, Hugh Casson, worked with him on the festival committee.
I was rather alarmed by Hugh. He had physically a very strong, as you know, punch-like profile, very powerful chin, and it was maybe this very strong head and very powerful voice that he had that always made him approach you slightly bent, slightly hunched shoulders, and his head slightly lowered, rather like a Welsh rugby football, I suppose. But he could be quite fierce, and I was a little bit frightened of him.
Casson was one of the architects on the festival committee. Wheldon had been brought in to organise the arts events, everything from music and drama to painting and concrete poetry.
The press was uniformly against us. The Tories thought we were the creeping avant-garde of socialism, which indeed we were. The left wing thought we were Hampstead intellectuals telling the working classes how to have fun, which of course we were. So as we were equally attacked on both sides, the brickbats sailed over the office 24 hours a day, but it was a time of total elation. We finished in 51. We all got the sack the morning it opened. Little standard note saying, thank you. No, he didn't say thank you. It said, your appointment terminates as from today. And so we, as it were, put our top hats on for the royal opening, then pushed on.
In the same year he joined the BBC, 1952, Wheldon found himself playing a curious double role as television publicity officer and, more surprisingly, the host of a new children's programme.
On that cheerful note, welcome to another edition of All Your Own. As usual, we've got youngsters here from all over the place, and we start with a guest from Chelmsford. Here he is.
All Your Own was designed to encourage hobbies as well as art and performance in talented and sometimes not so talented children. The programme editor was Cliff Mitchellmore, and Wheldon presented the series for 7 years.
The cliché thing to say about Huw on All Your Own was that he didn't patronise the children. And I suppose that's true. But I sometimes think that it was some way from being the whole truth, because while he didn't patronise, he wasn't chummy either. He didn't pretend that he was a child. He was perfectly clearly an adult. But I often wondered what the small children thought about this immense, rather eagle-like man stooping over them, asking these extremely penetrating questions, which he used to do.
All drummers have the same look, don't they? They have this kind of preoccupied look. Why?
Well, you have such a lot to do that you haven't got any time to smile.
What are your two names? Yours is?
James Page and
David Haskell. Both from Epsom?
Yes.
Where did you learn to play the drums?
The father. He taught me.
Did he?
Yes.
You play anything except skiffle?
Yes, Spanish and dance.
Do you as well? Getting a move on. What are you going to do when you leave school? Take up skiffle?
No, I want to do, biological research.
Do you? I knew that already. What do you mean by biological research?
But they understood that there was a man who had a serious interest in discovering what it is that they were talking about. So he used to ask quite penetrating questions. I mean, like, for example, how do you make sure that your conker isn't easily broken without breaking the rules? And what are the rules in your particular conker area, as it were? And he would ask this with as much directness as he would ask a general about how to conduct a war.
The ballet you're going to do is one that you've written, that's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's about what? Monday's
The
Child?
Children of the Week.
The Children of the Week. Did you give me the notes?
Yes.
Yes, well, I've got a few notes here which we'll read out when the ballet is on. Here they are, the other side here. The Children of the Week. And you wrote it, you arranged all the dance.
Yes.
Choreography, called.
Yes.
Which meant that you had to take orders from her, did you?
Yes.
Did you mind doing that?
No, not at all.
I'd like taking orders from her.
Yes.
Well, either you're very obedient or she's a very good master, one or the other. Okay, you start, don't you? Here. All right, ready?
Yes.
Off you go, then.
The performing arts had always featured strongly in All Your Own.
Monday's child, I have on these notes here, Monday's child is fair of face.
And in 1958, when the BBC Talks department conceived the notion of an arts magazine, they eventually hit on Wheldon as a presenter. But he insisted on editing the programme too, and he began to gather a team around him. Nancy Thomas was working on an outside broadcast from Brussels when she heard she'd got a job as one of the Monitor producers.
Monitor started, like all these programmes, it started a little slowly, and I think it took a little time to settle down. We had too many items at the beginning. We used to have 5, and you know, they were short, and very quickly it settled down to a maximum of 3, sometimes less. And there were always terrific arguments at the Talks meetings that were held weekly to look at the output. There were tremendous arguments, and there was quite a strong, what I would call a Philistine strain, i.e. an anti-art strain, in the Talks department at that time. And Donald Baverstock, who's running tonight, and Huw used to have terrific arguments at these meetings, because Donald would think that a lot of it was sort of rubbish.
The first edition of Monitor on the 2nd of February 1958 featured items on the theatre director Peter Brook, on the sculpture of Jacob Epstein, a new book by Kingsley Amis, and Joseph Cooper at the piano. But the programme began with a short impressionistic film about a circus. It was made by a young current affairs director called John Schlesinger.
My first professional job at the BBC really was making little films for the Tonight programme. They were just little 3-4-minute films, and I did about a dozen of those. And I wasn't very happy on the programme. In the end, they gave me the push. Donald Baverstock, who was the producer, said, when it works, boy, we're happy to have you, but when it doesn't, you're not worth it. And then Huw asked me if I'd like to come and join his program, which he was starting up, and suddenly life changed. It was a wonderfully happy and creative period for me, because when you're doing a film a month, which is what I kind of averaged out for Monitor, you're on to the next as soon as the old one's gone out. And that, I think, is the good thing about television, is that you're allowed to fail. You can make mistakes.
The right to fail was one of many phrases attributed to Wheldon that became part of the folklore of television, though what he actually said was, the aim is not to avoid failure, the aim is to give triumph a chance. And there were others, often quoted. The job of the producer, he said, was to pursue excellence. The job of the producer was to take his subject and tell it as a tale.
I remember him saying one to me, he said, that chap who was supposed to be producing that documentary, I heard him telling a funny story the other day, and he made such a mess of it that I can't think he's a good producer.
The staple diet of Monitor from the beginning was the studio or film interview with artists, writers, performers and directors, often, though not always, conducted by Wheldon. By the late 50s, programmes like Panorama and Tonight had already broken the mould of the tentative anodyne television interview and begun not only to question, but also to challenge. Now, on Monitor, Wheldon began to develop a style for the arts.
He was never afraid to ask the obvious question, and that was drummed into us as well. The obvious question, which you get panned by critics. They think you're a clown because you say to Colin Davis, do you really, does an orchestra need a conductor? Now that, of course, Huw knows the answer, but what he wants is Colin Davis's answer, because that leads to an explanation, it leads to, and you've got to use those sort of questions, especially with artists who are, I've found, and I would guess you've found, are actually they respond very well to simple and direct questions because it enables them to maneuver their answer how they want. It enables them to come at you. And Huw used the simple question brilliantly.
Yes. One of the things that strikes me about this figure, for example, is that it's one of the very few male figures that you've ever made. Now, in the first place, is this right?
Yes, I think I've done about 3 or 4 male figures out of the hundreds and hundreds that I've done, the sculptures. And now you mention it, they practically are all women. In fact, my subject is a female figure.
Why?
A woman. I don't know, it's just that that's what I'm interested in. But why, I don't know, and I don't think I want to know.
All right, no, why not?
Well, perhaps I can explain. Recently there was a book published on my work by some Jungian psychologist, a very good writer named Neumann. I think the title was The Archetypal World of Henry Moore.
Yes.
And he sent me a copy, which he asked me to read. But after the first chapter, I thought I'd better stop because it explained too much about what my motives were and what... and I thought it might stop me from ticking over if I went on and knew it all. So I prefer really to not talk about one's work too much, not to try to explain it too much. One can say things that don't matter about it, yes.
Are you suggesting that it's impossible to talk about art and that this program we are concerned with, for example, is useless?
No, not at all. What I'm... no, I find... I look in at this program very often, and for instance, the one you did on Lawrence Durrell, I found that after it, his books meant a bit more to me than they had done before.
But the confrontation with Durrell had something of a checkered history. The director on this occasion was David Jones.
Well, the Lawrence Durrell interview is a kind of classic example of strange circumstances, but I think it shows a lot of Hugh's strengths and weaknesses as an interviewer in a way. I'd had 2 marvellous days with Durrell down the south of France. There was at the time, it was exactly the time that Camus died in the car crash, so Durrell was very upset about that, but then he came through that. But Huw wasn't at all sure about Durrell. He'd been a bit doubtful about the story, and he wasn't quite sure whether Durrell was a meretricious talent or not, and he hadn't really got into the Alexandrian Quartet. So he was a bit spiky with Durrell on the first meetings. And within about half an hour, he actually did say to Durrell, he said, "You got it wrong, old chap. What you're writing about actually is." And Durrell was a bit taken aback by this. However, that was all fine, and we did a first half of the interview outside Durrell's house in the Camargue, where he'd built his little stone walls and so on. And the questions were very polite, and the answers were very polite, and it was marvellous, and it was fluent, and it was sophisticated. And in the end, Huw said, "It's boring. It's actually boring." Now, I can't tell Durrell he's being boring, but that's what it is. It's boring. And I agreed with this. Now, fate then played into our hands, because I had, for purely scenic reasons, chosen the amphitheatre in Nîmes for the second half of the interview. And Durrell turned up on the day, and he said, "Up there?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "No, I can't go up there." He said, I've got a very bad head for heights." And I was being very insensitive about this, but I kind of got him up there, and he sat down, and he was in an extremely bad mood as a result. And he was actually very jumpy. And Huw just, on a couple of questions, came out with a couple of rather insensitive things, and Durrell really went for the jugular a couple of times and gave Huw a very, very bumpy ride.
You're not grinding any moral axe in these books. There's no moral message as such whatsoever.
The point is this, that I'm an artist, and I can only think of the top thing in my profession. The world is so full of artists posing as priests, and priests posing as God. So, you know, it's about time that we sorted out the thing.
Let me put it in another way. You take bawdiness pretty seriously, I think.
No, I think I take it pretty naturally. But you see, my earliest influences have been people like, have you come across a Chinaman called Chuang Tzu?
No.
A philosophic comedian.
Tell me something about him.
A sort of hidden jerk. Well, he's really the basis of Lao Tse, the basis of the early Chinese religion, do you see?
And on the Tuesday morning, I was walking outside my cutting room,
and looking very disgruntled was Huw, wearing, to my astonishment, a bowler hat. Just why he was wearing this bowler hat, I don't know. I asked somebody once, and they said, oh, he always wears that when he goes to number 10. But I didn't quite believe it. But be that as it may, I said to Huw, how did you get on with Durrell? Oh, he said, terrible. He said, cut it down to 10 minutes, he said. You know, I was aghast a bit. And he said, I said, why? He said, oh, he said, the man talks about nothing, he said, except time continuum and words like that. He said, cut it down to 10 minutes and disappeared.
He went for personality, I think, more than we do these days. Much more for his relationship with the personality, and then what would this person give? And then how could he build on that? How could he follow that through? How could he build a story on that? So a lot depended with Huw on how he got on at that time with that person. He put a lot down to it. And his own character, of course, was very powerful, but he could be very, very gentle and very tender with people.
In 1962, Wheldon and his producer, Nancy Thomas, went with a film crew to Cannes in the south of France. There they took the great French film director, Jean Renoir, back to his childhood home. The subject of the interview was his father, the French impressionist Auguste Renoir. Wheldon was fascinated by the last painful years of the artist's life and by his determination to go on painting.
The rheumatism which had struck him in middle life had become crippling, so that in the end he couldn't unclench his hands and had to have bandages to prevent his nails growing into his flesh. His paintbrushes had to be pushed between his clenched fingers or through the bandages. This is a photograph of Renoir sitting at the head of the table in what was the dining room, and it was in this same room that I mentioned to his son that it was almost inconceivable that Renoir's disability shouldn't have affected his work at all.
Oh, not at all. After all, his eyes were the eyes of a young man, and his arm was absolutely steady. No, it didn't affect him at all.
So you don't associate this house with pain in any way?
No, just the opposite, with joy. The house was full of joy and laughter. Many servants around my mother. Well, I will show you our servants. So, there were in his paintings. Here is one. She was living in our house.
Yeah.
But it was so easy to ask her to sit down and to paint her.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the choice of a servant by Renoir was something extremely important. He asked them three things, three very important things. Number one, to have a skin which doesn't repulse light, a skin which catches light.
Yes.
That was the first condition. Second condition, to be pleasant human beings, nice people. That was very important. Third condition, if possible, to sing. He loved to be surrounded by singing people.
He didn't use professional models?
Oh, no, not at all. He couldn't stand professional models. He couldn't understand why a girl has to learn how to sit down, how to walk, just to be painted.
Jean Renoir had written a book about his father, and Huw, as you know, was absolutely devoted to his father, and they got on tremendously well.
Did he prepare a great deal for an interview like that? Did he...
Huw did, yes, because he was absolutely determined that he was going to be on top of his material when he was asking the questions, so he wasn't going to be caught out. Obviously, you fed him a lot of information, and Jen, but he did an enormous amount of homework on everything he did. I mean, nothing was what one might call chance, although they always looked at the end as if he'd sort of thought it up, 10 seconds ago.
People who write books in America nowadays, whether they're novelists or whether they're these sociologists and journalists who are looking at America from an American point of view, call themselves, I've heard them call themselves, intellectuals. Now, it's a word that's very rarely used in this country, intellectuals, and in fact, I don't quite know in terms of this country what an intellectual is.
Most of our writers, that is, our writers of fiction, and especially those known abroad, the most popular ones like Hemingway, Steinbeck, etc., are certainly not intellectuals. They're anti-intellectuals even. And our writers tend to be, especially as the ones known abroad, tend to be these red-blooded people whose minds would never be raped by an idea of... the intellectuals, then, are the people who deal with ideas and write articles, let's say. The best ones may also write books. Yes.
Would you go so far as to say that Ernest Hemingway had never been raped by an idea?
Absolutely.
Is Ernest Hemingway a good or a bad novelist in consequence of that?
Well, I am not an admirer of Hemingway's. Years ago, when I was young, I liked The Sun Also Rises, and I haven't put it to the test of rereading it. I rather liked A Farewell to Arms, and nothing else. And I think Hemingway's posturing, for one thing.
As what?
His posturing is what? The top club man of them all.
He doesn't give us, that's not his reputation here. His reputation here is that he's rather a lonely man who writes about lonely people, tough and muscular.
They're all members of a secret society, a club. He's the president. And they've all had the initiation rites, and they have the marks and so on,
Marks of suffering.
Well, no, they wear the red badge of courage.
One studio confrontation that nearly didn't happen was with the great surrealist painter Max Ernst. He'd been persuaded into a rare interview, but when he arrived he said he'd prefer not to discuss surrealism. Wheldon finally managed to persuade him to talk about insanity instead. The Monitor studio also became a test bed for experiments in drama, for ambitious musical items. Yehudi Menuhin was an early contributor. And in a bold and simple studio piece, Lotte Lenya sang Kurt Weill.
Oh, the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has McKeith, dear, and he keeps it out of sight. On the sidewalk, Sunday morning, lies a body oozing light. Someone sneaking around the corner. Is that someone? Mac the knife. Louis Miller disappeared, dear, after drawing out his cash. And McGee spends like a sailor. Did our boy do something rash? What about that fire in Soho? Many people burnt to death. In the crowd stands a wide-eyed Mackie, only slightly out of breath. Oh, the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has McKeith, dear, and he keeps it out of sight. Just a jackknife has McKeith, dear, and he keeps it out of sight.
To help him develop the music output of Monitor, Wheldon had brought in 1958 a young man who'd been working as a studio manager in sound radio. Here, in a John Schlesinger spoof on Hi-Fi Fanatics, the new recruit was roped in to impersonate a third program music critic.
John Terps, on the other hand, has given us a rather dapper account of the symphony on XZLP 4137. I fear the engineers have picked up a trifle too much resonance, so that fortissimos ring round the room, building up mush.
What was your impression of him? Was he a he sounds a formidable character to meet when you're young.
He was like nobody else I've ever met before or since, because he combined this enormous larger-than-life personality with very great perception. That's to say, he was both sensitive and strong, which isn't an easy combination. He was very authoritative. He'd boss you around. You had to stand in your own corner and fight back. You didn't always win with Huw because he was difficult to persuade. He was responsive to reason. when he came up against a very clear, diamond-sharp attitude towards a program idea, he'd respond to that, and he'd say, right, okay, got it. And then when he'd got it, he'd build on it.
Can you give me some notion of what if you were trying to sell him an idea, how would the conversation go?
I'll do one of mine first. Hugh, I got this idea to do a film about a string quartet. String quartet? Don't be daft, boy. Caviar for the general. No place for that on television. No, but it is quite interesting, you know. I mean, these quartets, they live together. I know all about quartets, because I wasn't born yesterday. Well, I had the idea that we'd seen them rehearsing. No, forget it. He simply thought that string quartet wasn't what television art, at that time, 1958, 59, didn't think that was what television should be doing. 6 months later, I had to go back on that one. And he said, all right, if you believe in it that much, I'll let you do it. And when I came to show him the rough cut, he said, you don't understand what you've done. I mean, you thought you'd make a program about a string quartet. You've actually made a program about music and about the way the gift of music is handed on from father to son.
Let's have a go, shall we? That's right. What are we going to play? Little Bo Peep? That's right. Well, hold it nicely there.
Oh, give it to me.
Got it?
So I have. Silly.
Good. And keep it square. Start on this string, I think.
Turned what was a workmanlike, fairly orthodox film into something really quite poetic by the way he found the secret, the sort of poetry in the story.
Yes, that's quite nice. We'll go back, Tony, because this bowing you don't quite articulate enough, yes? See what I mean? Oh, it's quite good otherwise. Could be better. Let's go, all right?
Wheldon and his protege Burton started up a whole tradition of music documentary on television, and they looked for new forms of presenting music. Monitor cameras eavesdropped on orchestra rehearsals, Colin Davis and the London Mozart Players. They brought eminent musicians to talk in the studio. This is Sir Thomas Beecham. They invented the music workshop and the masterclass. Nadia Boulanger took one on Monteverdi. And they brought music competitions to the screen. This first one in 1961 for fledgling conductors, with a formidable panel of judges, Giulini, Bolt, Legg and Klemperer.
All the competitors were asked to prepare 12 pieces, naturally chosen with an eye to the technical problems which they contained, such as bringing in the orchestra exactly on the beat, precisely at the right moment, at the end of a piano scale. This is a well-known death trap for conductors.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before the cadenza, that's the string chord, I think, isn't it? Do you have it? Yes.
cameras were directed by Humphrey Burton. But this sequence was put together in Wheldon's cutting room by a man who became himself something of a legend in television. Alan Tyrer was the chief film editor throughout the series. He cut films for all the Monitor directors, and he worked closely with Wheldon from the start.
He always used to make notes on old envelopes, which he produced from inside his pocket, you see. And I remember asking him once, would he like a proper notepad? And he said, oh, no, not at all. He said, everyone's got old envelopes on them. He said, they do admirably well. When we came to a discussion of the film, he was absolutely marvellous. In fact, in all my career, he's the best man I've ever had who could look at a rough cut, understand what you're doing, and even better than that, know how to improve it.
The painter Oskar Kokoschka at his open-air painting school in Salzburg. The film was made by another young director, Patrick Garland, who joined Huw Wheldon's team.
Well, Huw looked at the rough cut of this, and he liked it, and he said, fine, let's go ahead. He said, one thing, he said, I don't understand where that music comes from. And I said, well, it's a little piece of Bach flute. And he said, I know that it's a piece of Bach flute music. He said, that wasn't my point. He said, where does it come from? He said, you've just put it on. And I said, no, there's a chap playing the flute. He said, I don't see any chap playing a flute. And I said, yes, he's in the film. There's a student playing a flute. He said, I don't think there is. I said, I thought I was having a mental aberration. So I said, no, there is. So he said, let's run it again. And he saw the sequence and he said, stop the film. He stood up and he said, good God, he said, he exploded. He said, you have got on the grass, sitting in dappled shadow, one of the most beautiful creatures in the Western world, this lovely communist girl with her flaxen hair, the sun playing about her features, her lovely nose, eyes and lips, beautiful breasts, sitting there being painted by enchanting youth all round. He said, in the corner, in the shadows, under a tree, you've got some bugger playing a flute. Why, Bach, and you expect any of us to look at him?
In 1962, Monitor began to run full-length programs for special occasions. This one went out at Easter. It was a documentary about 4 unknown young painters, Pauline Boty, Peter Phillips, Derek Bochet and Peter Blake. The director was Ken Russell.
It was the first time pop art as such, you know, using popular culture like pin tables, Marilyn Monroe, all those things had ever been seen. And the twist with Chubby Checker and sort of rock and roll, you know, hadn't been seen on television. It was the about 1960. And so I made the film, and it was quite sort of flippant. No one spoke in it much, which was very unusual for Monitor, where people speak, because it's talks program, they talked all the time. Hardly anyone, because they were very inarticulate, but they expressed themselves in paint. I mean, they were artists, not talkers. And he saw the film, and he just sat, and at the end of it, you know, he just said, brilliant, old boy, brilliant. And he said, I've got to introduce it, old boy. I've got to say that these are serious artists, and they've been at the Royal College, you know, for years, and they are highly respected, and they won awards before they left. And I said, fine. And I said, do you mind if I pan down from you from a picture of Marilyn Monroe? He said, not at all, old boy. Fine, fine, absolutely fine.
Good evening. Our program tonight consists of one single film that we've made about 4 young artists. They're 4 painters who turn for their subject matter to the world of pop art, the world of the popular imagination, the world of film stars, the twist, science fiction, pop singers, a world which you can dismiss if you feel so inclined, of course, as being tawdry and second-rate, but a world all the same, in which everybody, to some degree anyway, lives, whether we like it or not.
Ken and I started to cut the film, and it was bright and amusing. We got some lovely people in it. But all the time I was doing this, Huw, I remember, kept nudging me and saying, can't I look at the cutting copy? Can't I see what's going on? I think he was deeply suspicious of what the result was going to be, whether it would let the whole tone of the department down. We were talking outside my cutting room late at night, and he suddenly turned around to Ken and said, what is that woman in the Peter Blake sequence, the woman that gets in the shower? And it was one of those sort of quick cuts we'd made, and there was a deathly hush because Ken and I suddenly realized that Huw didn't know and had not recognized Bridget Bardot.
But he was open to new ideas and didn't try and turn the tide back. And so on one side he would love Stubbs, and the other side he accepted pop art, and I think Monitor Programme was certainly the first the first programme to actually show in England the fact that pop art was here, and we've been living with it ever since.
After you'd assembled the material, would he come in and write it with you? Would you know what was in his mind as you were trying to do it?
Well, he that was another of his great talents. I mean, I coasted along on his talent for a long time. I mean, well, not for a long time, because he's not that impatient of fools, and I was a total fool when I first went on the programme. I knew nothing, except I did know a few images that I could knot together. But when it came to writing commentary, I mean, I hadn't the faintest idea what to say about things. And what do you say about Prokofiev? You know, you like him, you think his music's great. I said that to him. He said, that won't do, old boy. When we were sitting down with the editor, going backwards and forwards, trying to tell his life story in 15 minutes, a lot of sort of funny old archive Russian material. I cut Eisenstein's marvellous film Alexander Nevsky. Actually, Eisenstein's such a great editor, but he's got the people going the wrong direction, so he recut it to make it okay. And he saw the film, Prokofiev, and he said, no, tell me about him. And I said, well, he's great. And he said, great, you know, he said, I can't just say great. The film's 20 minutes long. We've got to have a bit more than great. And so word by word, he dragged out of me what I personally felt this great Russian composer had. And it was in very banal, stupid, sort of idiotic, sort of simplistic language, but which he made me then turn around. He would just sat there and said, I'm not doing your commentaries anymore. You're going to do them from now on. You're going to tell me. And I was nearly crying. I thought, what am I going to say? I don't know. It's just there on the film. Can't he see it? But, you know, word by word, comma by comma, sentence by sentence, he dragged it out. And I think out of the other people in the programme who were far more literate than I, he dragged visual things out of him. I mean, dragged literary things out of me. He dragged visual things out of them. So he just was relentless. He sat there until you did it.
In the following year, 1939, Prokofiev expanded this work into a dramatic cantata, which, with its songs of suffering, defiance, and belief in ultimate victory over the German invader, became one of the great patriotic pieces of music which helped carry the Soviet Union through the war. From 1941, Prokofiev may have been writing music to order, but it was music that came from the heart. Like everybody else, he wanted to win the war, to cry defiance. He did it with music.
There was one further ingredient in the Prokofiev film, quite a simple one, but it signaled the start of a whole new genre of program making. The character of Prokofiev himself is represented by an actor's hands at the piano.
Drama documentaries were looked at very suspiciously when they started. This was something to do with the policy, I think, of a revered woman that used to run talks at the time, Grace Wyndham Goldie. And they were very worried that drama combined with documentary would in fact be, shall we say, unfair on proper documentary. As far as I think they were concerned, proper documentary really was 4 bits of grainy archive, and we were home and dry.
You weren't allowed to show, you could only show existing material of the artist you were depicting. So that was generally stills. So when I did my film on Prokofiev, which was the first one, there weren't enough stills of him because, you know, he lived in the Soviet Union. There was no film on him whatsoever. And so I had to tell the story, and I had to show some hands playing the piano, and I had to give the intimation of at least a reflection of the man, so I showed the reflection of an actor in water. And Grace was there with Huw, and it was a huge breakthrough when they accepted that in the dubbing theatre, when we were dubbing the film. She said, well, it's... But I did have one shot of Prokofiev in his bed, on his deathbed, but it was a long shot. It was an actor playing the part. He didn't speak, but you could see him there. And they wouldn't accept that. They said, no, that's sentimental. It's bad drama. It's not what we're doing. You can show the hands, you can show the reflection, you can't show the man. So that was out. And the next film I did on a dead composer was Elgar, and I was allowed to show him because of the precedent in long shot, but he didn't speak.
Elgar's head was still full of great orchestral themes, not one of which he'd so far ever heard played. My idea is that there is music in the air, music all round me, he once said. I do all my composing in the open. At home, all I have to do is write it down.
In fact, it bore dividends because Elgar went from the age of 5 to 75. I used 5 actors, and it all looked like the same guy. You were looking at the landscape anyway.
We showed it to him one Wednesday night. I remember this very well at Ealing. Everyone had gone home. And we showed it to him. And he didn't like it at all. He stormed out of the theatre, leaving Humphrey Burton and Ken Russell absolutely aghast, and myself terribly worried that I wouldn't get into the dubbing theatre on the Friday.
It was 2 days later, in fact.
Yes, it was 2 days later we would go into the dub, you see. So we all met in the canteen. No one was there. We were all sitting there about 7:30 at night. And he said, what's all this business going on, he said, with people flying kites and explosions in the kitchen and jumping out of trees. He said, what is going on? Is this Elgar?
Well, in Hugh's book, composers didn't fly kites, and they didn't fly them on hills with their daughters, and they weren't inspired to write music because of those events. And I said, but Huw, and so he said, oh boy, that's a flight offence. I mean, no, you must cut that out here. The Elgar, Sir Edward Elgar, flying a kite on the Malvern Hills, a grown man, was ludicrous. And I said, but he did, Huw, and he used to ring up the Greenwich Observatory to get the weather forecast for the Malvern Hills because he didn't want to go traipsing up a 1,000-foot hill with a bloody big kite and his daughter when he could be home composing if there's going to be a gale up there. So he actually phoned up the Greenwich Observatory. Then, if it was good, he went up and he flew his kite, and he was inspired to write music. We must tell him, old boy. We must tell him.
As the gates of Armageddon opened in France, Elgar, too old to serve, left London for Sussex and turned to chamber music, to sonatas and quintets. Nothing, however, could sever the public's association of Elgar with his Boer war marching song, and the irony to a man who had sensed the disaster to come and felt its impact. became abominable.
And then he gave us quite a lecture. He said, I don't like that war sequence at all. He said, with all those blind people and all that. He said, you know, he said, war brings out other things, he said, than injury to people. He said, war has aspects of courage and determination and grit. And he says, we should be stressing this sort of thing. And I think Ken said, but the music doesn't really express that sort of thing. But when it came to do the commentary, it was perfectly stunning. He never made a mistake, and it only took us a day to do it. The whole thing done in 10-minute stabs, and quite live.
He worked fast, always composing in the open air, writing it down at night, turning his mind from public pomp towards the private agony and ecstasy of a worldly soul in purgatory and beyond. It was an intensely visionary and an intensely Catholic work, and Elgar was in no doubt about its stature. This is the best of me, he wrote, quoting Ruskin at the end of the score. For the rest, I ate, I drank, I slept, I loved, I hated as another. My life was a vapor and is not, but this is what I saw and know. This, if anything of mine, is worth your memory.
The classic Elgar film was followed by other Ken Russell drama documentaries for Monitor, increasingly more drama and less documentary. They included films on Bartók and Debussy. Russell's collaboration with Huw Wheldon lasted for 4 years.
I think one of his great virtues was the fact that he backed you up when you really felt you'd lost your way. No matter how inadequate the material you'd brought to him, he, by recutting it, putting the end at the beginning, old boy, and taking the middle out and dropping it in the waste paper basket, and putting his own sort of inimitable sort of commentary on it, could transform mediocrity into marvelous work. And, I mean, there are very few people about who can do that.
By 1963, Monitor had been on the air for 5 years, watched by a substantial audience, often over 3 million viewers. Huw Wheldon was now running the music and documentary department, as well as continuing to edit and present the program. His chief assistant and senior producer during the Monitor years was Peter Newington.
Across those years, I think the only serious disagreement I had with Huw was when I decided I wanted to leave Monitor after about 5 or 6 years, because I felt we'd been innovators. We created styles and techniques for that program, and I felt they were running out on us. We were wearing the machinery, and the cogwheels were getting worn. Our style was becoming a cliche. In fact, Private Eye had already picked us up in a sort of Seward's way. I mean, they called the program Janitor, and Huw Wellbred. I mean, and they were always describing people walking about with voiceover and that, and I felt it's got to change, or I've got to go, and somebody else has got to change it. And I did feel that we ought to go in for these more extended programs, like an hour. He was rather against that idea. And he was against change. He said, it works, old boy. Why do you want to change it?
Wheldon relinquished Monitor in the autumn of 1964. He would soon become controller of programs and eventually managing director of BBC Television. There was considerable speculation about whom he would choose as his successor on Monitor.
I remember that I went to him when I came back from the United States after doing Beyond the Fringe. And I wanted to learn how to make film, and I said I would like to have a job learning how to make film. And he leant forward and said, yes, I'm sure you would, but perhaps you would like to take over Monitor, he said. And it was those sort of unexpected acts of what seemed like insane generosity, and I'm sure it must have seemed mad to him afterwards, because I stepped deep into a swamp of criticism as soon as I took on the thing.
Huw Wheldon continued to support Miller's Monitor, though the change wasn't a popular one. The dramatic shift in Monitor's style and tone underlined two very different approaches to the arts.
The only area where I think he was at sea was where there were complex, abstract ideas, and this was really where he and I differed a great deal. I mean, I think that he had a very much an ad hominem view of the arts, that it was a series of great heroes or of trophies. Whereas I think I was more interested in what went into the making of the arts, what their social context was, and so forth. And I think he was rather impatient of this and thought that this was fiddle-faddling, that what you did was to go out there and find the big men.
His destiny was to be a leader. I mean, he led a team on Monitor, and I don't think it mattered to him who was responsible for one particular piece of excitement or quality, as long as it was there. In fact, I think he was more pleased when other people achieved that kind of standard than if he did himself. And he cared for the television service in a kind of regimental way. It was the regiment. And he cared about the honor of the regiment. And if the problem was whether the regiment, that the corporation, was going to do well, and it depended on him being there to make sure that he did, he didn't have any question that he should do it.
Huw took the programme maker's voice right into the heart of the BBC's institutional centre and made those up there familiar with the makers, because there is a division between a bureaucracy and those who work in a bureaucracy, and that's one of the dangers of big institutions, that the division becomes a gap, and the gap becomes a chasm, and it becomes unbridgeable. Huw just took the programme makers in, and it always talk in terms of programmes. It would never be the BBC, it would be this chap, that man's work.
The creative impulse in most of British broadcasting comes from a producer or a director, or both, working with a commentator or a reporter, who may themselves be writers, or, and very frequently, with a writer as such. Many people contribute, designers, cameramen, all sorts of people, but the main creative thrust is there. They must be able to work together, and between them, they constitute the author. They make the program. You help them, provide resources, stimulate them, possibly even inspire them, but fundamentally what you have to do is trust them. If it's original work you're after, you'd better leave it to individuals. But of course the business isn't easy. I shall never forget, not ever, in all my life, making a series of programs many, many years ago with the late Gilbert Harding. There were 7 of them. They went out on Thursdays and they failed. We did one after the other and they failed. And if you say to me, how do I know they failed? There is no problem about knowing. I used to go into Lime Grove on Friday mornings and people said, hello, Huw. Go to the cutting room or to have a cup of coffee, and other people said, hello, Huw. And that was all they said, and all I could hear around me all morning, Friday after Friday, was the programme not being mentioned.
Someone called him the last of the great actor-managers, and it is perfectly true that he was a manager, but it is equally true that he was an actor in the sense that he gave a marvellous performance. And he would put on a performance of all kinds of things, one of which is being the boss, being the leader. Now, that is only suspect if, in fact, the performance doesn't bear any relationship with what's going on inside. And, of course, the point about Hugh's performances were that they all bore direct relationship to what was going on inside. They were a facet of him.
Is there any particular picture that when anyone mentions Huw Wheldon comes into your mind?
I think it is that stooping, munching, interested, concerned face leaning over one's shoulder as the movie owner clattered away, and you could see his hand beating behind one. Yes, and now. It's that picture of someone concerned for one's own creativity and for one's own creative actions, but nevertheless concerned to see it operate at its best. And maddening though it was to have this chin leaning over one, go away, Hugh. The fact that someone was as concerned for one's work as he was is something which I'll always be grateful for. I have to concede that almost every time that he made one of these gestures and said, now, try though one did to make it some other time, that cut, the now was almost always right.
Some of the programmes broadcast by BBC Television under Huw Wheldon's management include Civilization, America, The Ascent of Man, The Forsyte Saga, Steptoe and Son, Till Death Us Do Part, Dad's Army. Plays by David Mercer, by Harold Pinter, by Tony Garnett and Ken Loach. Porridge, Monty Python's Flying Circus, The Likely Lads, Newsnight, Omnibus, The Search for the Nile, The Tribal Eye, Young Musician of the Year.